um, until the technical is done. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. We have a specific technique to keep you awake, as you can see. I have been involved in co-chairing the working group of the EYV 2011 Alliance on the topic of volunteering infrastructure, which is a topic very, very dear to my heart. And I hope you will become fans of volunteering infrastructure after I'm done with my presentation. The main objectives of our working group have been to identify some of the key features of an enabling environment for volunteering infrastructure in Europe and, of course, in the member states, and also to extract some examples of good practice in terms of making volunteering infrastructure working properly, and to feed these good practice examples into the PAVE document, or PAVE, how you choose to call it, in order to show that there are things that can support volunteering infrastructure and that can be adapted or adjusted to particular contexts in different European countries. Our first difficult task, however, has been to define what is our working group going to talk about. And this was the question that we started with: what is volunteering infrastructure? So this has been a very difficult debate to take within our group, and we have started from definitions like volunteering infrastructure is whatever enables the volunteer to do what he or she volunteered to do. We continued with saying volunteering infrastructure means everything that makes volunteering work. And in the end, we have come up with a more concrete, let's say, definition, which says that volunteering infrastructure is a combination of organizational structures and support mechanisms which together enable volunteering to develop and to provide benefits for the society and for the individual. Now, when we talk about organizational structures, then we mean, of course, volunteering involving organizations which are most closely working with volunteers. But we also mean support organizations, such as volunteer centers or volunteer support centers, which make the link between volunteers and other organizations working with them. We mean volunteer developing agencies, umbrella organizations, or networks at all levels: local, regional, national, European levels. When we talk about support mechanisms, here we talk about appropriate and, of course, enabling legal frameworks. We talk about adequate funding for organizations. We talk about data collection systems to enable us to prove our impact. We talk about the quality assurance systems and about institutionalized communication and collaboration with decision makers. If we manage to build all this, we will have a properly working volunteering infrastructure. Now, in terms of what roles volunteering infrastructure fulfills, I'm taking you a little bit through the logic behind the recommendations that we will make in order to support volunteering infrastructure, because this term has been used, but it has not been properly defined, and we found in our group very important to clarify what do we mean by volunteering infrastructure, and of course why is it so important that it deserves to be supported. So in terms of the roles the volunteering infrastructure fulfills, it helps us to provide quality volunteering opportunities. It prepares the ground for the volunteers to get involved and to do a meaningful work for themselves and also for their beneficiaries and their communities. It provides support to volunteers, training for volunteers, evaluation, counseling, managing volunteers. It helps matching volunteers with opportunities. It helps also building the capacity of volunteer involving organizations, and it helps sharing good practice. It removes barriers to volunteering by creating opportunities of involvement for the marginalized groups of the society, and it helps in raising awareness on the value of volunteering for both the individual and the society. Nevertheless, it also helps to influence the policy environment, and PAVE is one of the examples in this in this area. Consequently, the contributions of volunteering infrastructure are directly linked to the quality of volunteering, to the management of the supply and demand of volunteers, to the added value of the services provided by volunteers. The work of the volunteering infrastructure helps to create social value and social capital and social cohesion. It helps to creatively solve local problems by involving volunteers in doing this. And I think very importantly, it empowers citizens. It gives a sense of self-esteem and of happiness with what you do and how the world around you looks. And this is soft, but very, very important. The state of the field in volunteering infrastructure is not very easy to sketch. There are limited data talking about the size of the volunteering infrastructure organizations and about the impact of their work. We find a volunteering infrastructure landscape which is marked by diversity. There is a huge diversity of structure, of organizations active in different countries within Europe. There is a wide variety of support mechanisms available for these organizations. There are different traditions of volunteering in different countries, and there are institutional choices which affect volunteer development, which are different in different countries. We see a volunteering infrastructure which is marked by a diffuse responsibility. We don't always have clear bodies with competencies in volunteering. It was recognized also in the opening this morning that volunteering falls across so many policy areas that it's sometimes very difficult to put them together and to harmonize the variety of interests and of approaches that volunteers has to deal with. We talk about sometimes limited representation power within the civil society. Not always the volunteer involving organizations are properly organized in order to deliver their interests and to have a meaningful dialogue with policymakers. And this is, again, very important to be further developed. At the member states level, various times it is recognized that there is a limited strategic vision on volunteering, particularly because it falls under so many policy areas. And we also, of course, struggle with a limited funding for volunteering infrastructure. These are partly leading us to the challenges for volunteering infrastructure, which are connected to funding, which is limited, which doesn't cover the core costs of volunteering infrastructure all the time. It is undedicated funding. It is funding for general matters of civil society or for particular fields like social field environment. It's not dedicated to supporting volunteering infrastructure, which means you can have access to it, but it's not particularly for you, and this limits the capacity of the volunteering infrastructure organizations to access this kind of funding and to support their work. Sometimes funding is bureaucratic and burdensome. It brings along so many administrative tasks that it takes a long time to fulfill those, and it takes the time that would have to go to programs and services delivered by and with volunteers. Another challenge for the infrastructure is related to balancing the needs and the expectations of organizations on the one side and of volunteers on the other side. We see people who want to get involved, but they are free in the evening or they are free over the weekend. And we see professionalized organizations who have paid staff and work during the working hours. So we see organizations who wait for a long-term engagement from volunteers, but we see volunteers searching for one-day involvement. So it is very difficult to match all these different trends, and this is a task for volunteering infrastructure to fulfill. We also see difficulties in improving the impact of volunteering infrastructure, and this is directly linked with the limited data available on the topic. Another problem, let's say, of the volunteering infrastructure is the fact that it needs constant involvement and investment of resources. It's not something that you build and it stays there and does the work forever. It constantly needs to be sustained to be developed to adjust to the new challenges of the society and of volunteers. And it also has a very, very important role in safeguarding the value of volunteering, the core value and the core concept of volunteering. We see trends of taking volunteering as a cheap way to do some things that we cannot afford to do anymore. We see volunteering induced to a certain level of compulsory activity, which is not necessarily how it should be. So a role and a challenge for volunteering infrastructure is to safeguard the core value of volunteering. Of course, all of these can be addressed if all the stakeholders put their efforts together and follow recommendations which have been included in PAVE document, but not only in it, also the communication of the Commission and the conclusions of the Council include very, very valuable recommendations that can help volunteering infrastructure further develop. We talk about creating appropriate legal frameworks which are supportive for volunteering infrastructure and for volunteers, and my colleague will tell you definitely more about the legal frameworks. We are recommending to have dedicated funding, which is also reliable and accessible. We have a wide variety of grassroots organizations which find their way very difficultly through the websites that display information about funding, and this needs to be brought easier and closer to them. We need to establish comparable data collection systems to have an idea of how much volunteering is happening, what are volunteers learning, what are they contributing to the society, and how much value does this add to our society overall. We also recommend to establish clear policy directions. There is a very good set of recommendations within PAVE, and if it's taken forward by all the stakeholders, it can help change the environment for volunteering and make it more enabling, thus resulting in more volunteering for the society and for the individuals. We need to see at the national level that the policy agenda gets set. Just following the example of PAVE, national states could have their own national strategies, could implement their own policy agendas, taking the European level closer to their national level. Maybe this is the right time to see volunteering addressed as a policy area at the European level, because we've seen it mentioned so many times that it falls across too many policy areas. It can be the responsibility of so many that maybe it is easier to just make it an independent policy area, and that would be easier to deal with. We need to invest in appropriate support mechanisms for volunteering infrastructure. We have recommended within PAVE to build what we called European Knowledge Institute for Volunteering, which would be an institution to provide data collection, to provide information, to provide good practice and facilitate exchange of experience. Adopting the European Statutes of Associations would be also another supporting mechanism that can be done, and stimulating the member states to implement the manual of measuring the volunteer work that was endorsed by the International Labour Organization. The last point I would like to make, because Martin here is pushing me to finish, is directly to civil society. We need to become stronger. We need to work together to develop legitimate and representative structures to facilitate our capacity to dialogue meaningfully with the decision makers. As the European Year of Volunteering 2011 has proved, if we get together and we work for it, we can get it from the decision makers. Thank you very much.